Today most likely will, yeah, actually it should, unless something interrupts me and I can't finish. This will be our last week in First Maccabees, looking at the story of these 5 brothers, some more prominent than others, who delivered Israel, who God used to deliver Israel during a very difficult time in their history. And after this week, it's kind of a stopping point. It's the end of a chapter. I might just continue going into the next chapter next week. I might also go to a video class or have something else going on for in here. So that's just a decision that needs to be made over this next week. But I've realized that I need to be spending more time on some other things throughout the week as well, and a little bit less time on lesson preparation. So we'll see, though. We'll see how things go. For now, you have your handouts. First Maccabees 13 through 16 is where this comes from. It is abridged. It's not all of it here. If you want to read the whole book, the easiest way, if you don't have a computer. If you have a computer, you can just type it into Google and it's there. But because it's free, it's been around for ages, obviously. But if you want a physical copy, the easiest way is to go to the library, go to the Bibles section, and find a Catholic Bible, because it's in there. And again, to emphasize, we do not believe that this is scriptural. They did not themselves believe that this account had prophetic authority. There was not a prophet in Israel at this time, but it is a very useful historical record, and there's nothing wrong with it as a historical record, though it can be a little politically slanted sometimes. Very pro-Hasmonean, so the Maccabean family. There were times in history, the history of this family, and we'll see some of those times as we go on from here, when the Hasmonean family was not as popular as they were right here. And a big purpose of this book is to support that family and legitimize their leadership in Israel, and also to legitimize the relationship that they have had with foreign powers, specifically Rome. So we know for very certain that the book of First Maccabees was not written after a certain point of history where Rome would not have been as popular with the Jews anymore. It was probably written very close to the time of these events, maybe a generation or two afterwards. But let's start at the beginning of our sheet here. It says, in those days, Simon encamped against Gazara and surrounded it with troops. So this is right after we got done last week. There are these constant leadership changes in the Seleucid kingdom. And most recently, Demetrius II is the one who's gained the upper hand against Trypho. Trypho is no longer as popular as he used to be, but Trypho is still technically the one in charge. He's kind of the usurper. He's the one who acted in the young king's name, the son of Alexander Ballas. Antiochus VI, was it? The kid. And using the kid as an excuse, took over the kingdom and then had the kid killed once he had power. So King Demetrius is the legitimate ruler, if there is a legitimate ruler at this point. And Trypho is still in charge, but Demetrius has officially granted independence to the Jewish nation. As far as he's concerned, they're an independent country. They're free of all taxes, free of all Seleucid oppression. The fortresses that they've been fighting about belong to them now, at least officially. Maybe not completely in fact yet. But in those days, at the beginning of Simon's rule, Simon, the last of these 5 brothers, the only one who is still alive, Simon encamped against Gazara and surrounded it with troops. He made a siege engine, brought it up to the city, and battered and captured one tower. The men in the siege engine leaped out into the city, and a great tumult arose in the city. The men in the city, with their wives and children, went up on the wall with their clothes rent, and they cried out with a loud voice, asking Simon to make peace with them. They said, "Do not treat us according to our wicked acts, but according to your mercy." So Solomon reached an agreement with them and stopped fighting against them. But he expelled them from the city and cleansed the houses in which the idols were, and then entered it with hymns and praise. He cast out of it all uncleanness, and settled in it men who observed the law. He also strengthened its fortifications and built in it a house for himself. So Simon is continuing the same fight that his family has been fighting against Greek culture and idolatry in Israel, restoring the land to those who keep the law, who are Jews not only by blood but in heart, as far as he can. And he does do this in a little bit more of a gentle way than we see some of his brothers, particularly Judas, do it. And it's a few years later, different time, different measures, but he's not hunting down and killing Hellenists here, people who have adopted Greek culture. He's being much more lenient toward them and willing to live with them as long as they don't cause trouble. But the men in the citadel at Jerusalem were prevented from going out to the country and back to buy and sell. So they were very hungry, and many of them perished from famine. And this citadel at Jerusalem, or as the Acra, as it's called, was, we've seen it be a problem ever since Antiochus IV. It was right next to the temple. So the group of Hellenists in this citadel would come out and disrupt temple worship and then go back. And they were just a constant nuisance. This was their last stronghold, really, in Israel. And it was just maddening to the Hasmonean family that they couldn't drive them out. But they have been under siege for a while. They're not allowed to buy and sell. They're separated from the rest of the city. They became hungry, and many of them perished from famine. Then they cried out to Simon to make peace with them, and he did so. But, just like he did with the citizens of Gazara, he expelled them from there and cleansed the citadel from its pollutions, meaning its idolatry. On the 23rd day of the 2nd month, in the 171st year, the Jews entered it with praise and palm branches, and with harps and cymbals and stringed instruments, and with hymns and songs, because a great enemy had been crushed and removed from Israel. And Simon decreed that every year they should celebrate this day with rejoicing. The citadel finally fell. He strengthened the fortifications of the temple hill alongside the citadel, and his men dwelt there. And Simon saw that John, his son, had reached manhood, so he made him commander of all the forces, and he dwelt in Gazara. So there are 2 little bubbles here, one of them pointing to Gazara, which was conquered, and one to the Acra, which was conquered in Jerusalem. And there's Jerusalem. And according to Josephus, it doesn't say so here, but Simon had the hill on which the Acra had stood demolished. He actually had the hill itself taken down. It used to be at the highest point in Jerusalem, overlooking the temple. By getting rid of that hill, it was a 3-year project, but they removed the hill. They scraped it flat down to the level of the rest of the city. It made the Temple Mount at that point the highest point of Jerusalem. And he made his son John, later called John Hyrcanus, commander of all the forces. And the reason John is mentioned here is because he will become, slightly spoiler, but he will become the next leader. He will become the first in the line of high priests / kings to follow the original family. So these two coins, I've used them before, but the one with kind of the squiggly wormy hair is Trypho, the usurper, and the one with the beard is Demetrius II. So in the 172nd year, King Demetrius II, son of Demetrius I, assembled his forces and marched into Media to secure help so that he could make war against Trypho. When King Arsaces of Persia, I don't really know how to say that, of Persia and Media, heard that Demetrius had invaded his territory, he sent one of his commanders to take him alive. And he went and defeated the army of Demetrius and seized him and took him to Arsaces, who put him under guard. So, in just a very small number of words, Demetrius II is out of the picture politically. He's not able to lead an army anywhere. The place called Persia and Media here used to be part of the Seleucid kingdom. Remember when we saw that map back at the beginning, the Seleucid kingdom stretched all the way from Syria on the Mediterranean Sea all the way back to India, pretty much. The whole region over there that Alexander the Great had conquered. It has significantly shrunk at this point. Judea, of course, is independent now. And another nation that just recently became independent is the Parthian kingdom, or later the Parthian Empire. And that's technically the group of people who are called the Medes and Persians here. They become very important later in the history of Rome. The Parthian Empire was the reason the Roman Empire never really went in that direction, never really got to India and the lands beyond. They were the main rival, actually, of the Roman Empire in that direction. And later on, we're going to see Israel kind of caught between Rome and Parthia in the same way that we've seen them here, caught between the Seleucid kingdom and the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. Anyway, that's later. That's later. But it's the same area that nowadays we call Iran. That's where Demetrius II got taken alive, got his army defeated, as he was trying to strengthen himself to take on Trypho. So, here we go. So Antiochus the seventh, it takes a little while to process the Roman numerals, but Antiochus the seventh was another son of Demetrius the first. So if you're just reading through First Maccabees, it's confusing because it says Antiochus, son of King Demetrius. And you automatically think this is the same Demetrius that was talked about in the previous paragraph. It isn't. It's his father. It's Demetrius the first. So Antiochus the seventh is Demetrius the second's brother, not his son. Okay? So Demetrius the second had a brother named Antiochus the seventh. And this Antiochus sent a letter from the islands of the sea to Simon, the priest and ethnarch of the Jews. Ethnarch, like ethnic group. An ethnarch is somebody who rules over a group of people, a people group, whose authority is tied to that people group rather than to lines on a map. And that's what Simon was at this point. He ruled the Jews. Anybody who wasn't a Jew, he really didn't have authority over. But he was, the great priest and ethnarch of the nation of the Jews. He sent greetings. Whereas certain pestilent men, said Antiochus the seventh, have gained control of the kingdom of our fathers, specifically Trypho, I intend to lay claim to the kingdom so that I may restore it as it formerly was. And that should have been a worrying little phrase right there, because as it formerly was, it included the land of Israel. So if it was restored completely to its former glory, Israel would no longer be independent. He says, now therefore I confirm to you all the tax remissions that the kings before me have granted you, and release you from all other payments from which they have released you. I permit you to mint your own coinage as money for your country, and I grant freedom to Jerusalem and the sanctuary. So they were already free, but here he is granting them permission to do these things. Granting them freedom in this case is a subtle way of asserting the fact I'm still bigger than you, I'm still really the one in charge, assuming that I take my country back. He says, all the weapons that you have prepared and the strongholds you have built and now hold shall remain yours. Every debt you owe to the royal treasury and any future debts shall be canceled for you from henceforth and for all time. When we gain control of our kingdom, we will bestow great honor upon you and your nation and the temple, so that your glory will become manifest in all the earth. So it sounds really great. Simon makes the decision to back Antiochus the seventh. It wasn't a hard decision, with Trypho being the kind of person he was, and the threat he was to the Jewish nation. In the 174th year, Antiochus set out and invaded the land of his fathers. All the troops rallied to him, so that there were few with Trypho, being the son of the previous line of kings, being the rightful ruler of the nation, really did mean something. And as I pointed out last week, by murdering the king that he could control, that was under his charge, who was a rightful ruler, Trypho really put himself in a bad position. He turned the nation against him. Antiochus pursued Trypho, and he came in his flight to Dor, which is by the sea, for he knew that troubles had converged upon him, and his troops had deserted him. So Antiochus encamped against Dor, and with him were 120,000 warriors and 8,000 cavalry. He surrounded the city, and the ships joined battle from the sea. He pressed the city hard from land and sea, and permitted no one to enter or leave or enter it. And Simon, at this time, doing his part, sent 2,000 picked men to fight for him, and silver and gold, and much military equipment. But Antiochus refused to receive them, and he broke all the agreements he formerly made with Simon and became estranged from him. He no longer needed Simon's help. He had already practically won. The army of the Seleucids was on his side, and he had made those promises in the first place, not because he wanted Jerusalem and Judea to be independent, but because he believed he needed their help. Now he doesn't believe that anymore. So he changes his mind. In fact, Antiochus sent to Simon Athenobius, one of his friends, to confer with him, saying, "You hold control of Joppa and Gazara and the citadel in Jerusalem. They are cities of my kingdom. You have devastated their territory. You have done great damage to the land, and you have taken possession of many places in my kingdom. Now then, hand over the cities that you have seized, and the tribute money of the places that you have conquered outside the borders of Judea, or else give me for them 500 talents of silver, and for the destruction that you have caused, and the tribute money of the cities, 500 talents more." So altogether, 1,000 talents, which would have been an absolutely incredible sum that would have taken years to pay. And he says, "Otherwise, we will come and conquer you." Now, just to tie up loose ends here a little bit, Cleopatra Thea, remember, she had been married to Alexander Ballas and later taken away from him and given to Demetrius II, who is still alive at this point. But she was not with Demetrius II right now. She was still living in Syria, in that area. And out of fear for her life, probably, and the life of her children, she sent a message to Antiochus VII to come into the country, to invade the country, and she would marry him instead. Legitimize his place as the rightful ruler instead of his brother. So, Trypho was eventually hunted down. He fled the city. Oh, okay, that's going to come in a little bit. We're going to, down toward the bottom of that column, it says, "Now Trypho embarked on a ship and escaped toward Thaisa." Let's go there in order, though, all right? Antiochus gives this threat to Simon. So Athenobius, the one Antiochus is sending, the friend of the king, came to Jerusalem. And when he saw the splendor of Simon, and the sideboard with its gold and silver plate, and his great magnificence, he was amazed. He had in his mind that this was a poor nation, and there's a lot more wealth here than he expected to see. And he reported to Simon the words of the king. But Simon gave him this reply: "We have neither taken foreign land, nor seized foreign property, but only the inheritance of our fathers, which at one time had been unjustly taken by our enemies." Situation really doesn't change a lot through history. The Israelites believed they had a right to these places, even though a generation back they didn't belong to Israel. According to the land God had given them, they should have, and they felt justified in taking them. They had taken back what had been unjustly taken by our enemies, Simon said. "As for Joppa and Gazara, which you demand, they were causing great damage among the people and to our land. For them we will give 100 talents. So a full decimal point down from the 1,000 talents that had been demanded. Athenobius did not answer him a word, but returned in wrath to the king and reported to him all these words and the splendor of Simon and all that he had seen. The idea being he can obviously afford this kind of sum. He is a lot better off than we thought he was, and a lot more arrogant and hard to control than we expected as well. So the king was greatly angered because of this. The relationship between Antiochus VII and Simon is not good. Now, Trypho embarked on a ship and escaped, as I said, to Orthosia. Then the king made Candabius commander-in-chief of the coastal country, but the king pursued Trypho. So Candabius was left in charge, left to take care of Simon, specifically as the king continued chasing Trypho. And Trypho was hunted down. He was forced to commit suicide. So he's done. He's out of the picture. Candabius, in the meantime, came to Jamnia and began to provoke the people and invade Judea and take captive and kill them. That's this map here. So the gray lines, there are the Seleucid forces, or is that purple? That's purple. So they're over there in Jamnia, or around it, making raids, that's the dotted lines, into Israel, into the land that Israel currently has. And the red lines are the Hasmonean forces, the forces of Simon. Yeah. He began to provoke the people and invade Judea and take people captive and kill them. He built up Kedron and stationed there horsemen and troops so that they might go out and make raids along the highways of Judea. John went up from Gazara, so John Hyrcanus, Simon's son, went up from Gazara and reported to Simon his father what Candabius had done. And John called his two older sons, Judas and John, and said to them, I and my brothers and the house of my father have fought wars of Israel from our youth until this day. And things have prospered in our hands, so that we have delivered Israel many times. But now I have grown old, and you, by his mercy, are mature in years. Take my place and my brothers, and go out and fight for our nation. And may the help that comes from heaven be with you. So officially passing the torch to the younger generation. So John chose out of the country 20,000 warriors and horsemen, and they marched against Candabius and camped for the night in Modane. Early in the morning they arose and marched into the plain. And behold, a large force of infantry and horsemen was coming to meet them, and a stream lay between them. Then he and his army lined up against them, and he saw that the soldiers were afraid to cross the stream. So he, John Hyrcanus, crossed over first, and when his men saw him, they crossed over after him. Then he divided the army and placed the horsemen in the midst of the infantry, for the cavalry of the enemy was very numerous. And they sounded the trumpets, and Candabius and his army were put to flight, and many of them were wounded and fell. The rest fled into the stronghold. John pursued them, and about 2,000 of them fell. And he returned to Judea safely. So not all is wrapped up, not all is going to be wrapped up quite by the end here. We still have Antiochus the Seventh. He's still angry at Judea. But as far as these five brothers are concerned, the story ends just about here. There was a man named Ptolemy, son of Abudas, who had been appointed governor over the plain of Jericho. And he had much silver and gold, for he was son-in-law of the high priest. So one of Simon's daughters had married this man. Simon had given his daughter in marriage to this man named Ptolemy, not the Ptolemies ruling Egypt, but another Ptolemy. And he was rich, and this son-in-law of Simon had been given possession of the plain of Jericho. His heart was lifted up. He determined to get control of the country and made treacherous plans against Simon and his sons to do away with them. Now Simon was visiting the cities of the country and attending to their needs. And he went down to Jericho with Mattathias and Judas, his sons. So his older son and his younger son. John is the middle child. John isn't here. But his older son and his younger son, Mattathias and Judas, in the 177th year, in the 11th month, which is the month of Shabbat. The son of Abubas received them treacherously in the little stronghold called Doc, which he had built. And it does seem that his motivation was simply to become high priest himself, to become ruler of the country, whether he would have been high priest or not. I don't know what his plans were, but it was selfish ambition that drove him to do this. He gave them a great banquet and hid men there. And when Simon and his sons were drunk, Ptolemy and his men rose up, took their weapons, and rushed in against Simon in the banquet hall, and they killed him and his two sons and some of his servants. So he committed an act of great treachery, returning evil for good. John Hyrcanus heard about this. Ptolemy sent men after him to kill him as well. If there are any of the sons left, then he's not the next one in line to take over. But John heard about it in advance, killed the people who came to kill him, and got the people on his side, got to Jerusalem before Ptolemy did. And so when Ptolemy got there, he found the gates shut to him. The people obviously on John's side felt his. And it was a very short-lived rebellion. He escaped into Arabia, I believe, and there's no more that we know about him. And so, as I said, the Seleucid kingdom is still very upset with Israel. There's still this tension, still this ongoing conflict that just keeps coming up again and again. But that first generation is ended. The torch has been passed to John Hyrcanus, who will survive to pass it to his son and begin a line of high priests and rulers that will last all the way up until the time of Herod the Great, at the beginning of the New Testament. So these are imaginative woodcuts, not based on their actual faces. We don't know what they looked like. But these are the three of the five brothers that actually ruled, that led the nation. The first one, Judas. Second one, Jonathan, took over after Judas died. And then after Jonathan was betrayed and murdered, in a very similar way to Simon's betrayal and murder, Simon on the end there took over. And Simon was, in a way, the best part of these two brothers. Judas was more bold, he was more reckless, he was very much a military-minded man and a great warrior. But zeal without caution is recklessness, and it was recklessness ultimately, and a sense of honor that led him to go up against forces that he was not a match for and led to his death. Jonathan had caution, and it failed him at just the wrong moment. He trusted someone he shouldn't have trusted. But caution without zeal leads to compromise. Simon had both the religious zeal of Judas and the political sense of Jonathan. And as their own father pointed out, he was the wisest of the sons. He was the wisest of these three overall. But unless you're discussing the wisdom of God, wisdom is relative. You can be wiser than someone else and still be in some ways a fool. And Simon was not free from the weaknesses or immune to the dangers that ensnared the other members of his family. Okay. That's the bell, but I'll go over just quickly what I have here in closing. Matthew 10:16 is where Jesus tells his disciples, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And this very much describes the nation of Israel under the leadership of the Hasmonean family as they dealt with the nations around them. Even as they wanted to simply restore the proper worship of God, they were constantly being plotted against. They were trying to be overthrown from multiple directions. Jesus' disciples were told to love and to seek the lost just as he did, but they would have been fools to trust the lost. Jesus himself did not entrust himself to those who claimed to believe in him because he knew their hearts. And showing love, having a good relationship with somebody that you can't trust can be a terrible challenge. And it's not always obvious who can be trusted. And Paul had trouble with this in 2 Corinthians. He says he has had dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the desolate places, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brothers. And in the end, this is why we need more than what human wisdom can provide. In Isaiah 30, verse 1, God condemns those who make an alliance, as the Hasmoneans often did, but not of my spirit. So even after the prophetic word had ceased, and before the Holy Spirit came at Pentecost, God answered prayer and gave people wisdom. The traps they fell into, the compromises they made, they didn't have an excuse for those things. They did accomplish a lot of good things, and they deserve credit for those things. Ultimately, God deserves credit for those things. But we have even less of an excuse than they do for being taken in by evil. Any thoughts, questions about what we've gone over today? All right, let's go ahead and close. Father, thank you for the wisdom that you have given us. All of us are in need of it. All of us have some kind of influence over others, a part to play in your plan. And Solomon was overwhelmed by the need that he had for wisdom in governing your great people. And we all have need of that same wisdom. Whatever authority, whatever sphere of influence you've given to us, help us to rely on you, to not rely on what our eyes can see, not only to remember why we're fighting, but who is there to help us fight, and give us the strength and give us the wisdom and the courage that we need. Help us to honor you, to glorify you by the way that we live this week and the way that we worship you this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.